I kept hearing people say, well, she's a made up story. There was never a Fannie Doyle. This is just something that they made up to, counteract Laura Secord. And I heard this from people on
Yeah.
both sides of the river.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting there going, no.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stories of 1812 podcast. This is a series in which we look at the lives of individuals who participated in and lived during the War of 1812 period in North America and why we need to remember them. And our guest today is Kate Emerson. And by way of introduction, Kate is a historian. She's an official historian.
Yes.
She was educated at Boston University. She holds an MA in American history. And welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Or is it Catherine? Or does it matter?
Well, only my mother and lawyers call me Catherine.
Oh, all right then.
That means I'm in trouble.
You're in trouble, so we'll stick with Kate. Tell us just a little bit about the Niagara County Historian's Office and your role, because I think it's kind of interesting what you do.
The state of New York, about 1915, came up with a bunch of laws where they established municipal historians. Every municipality, borough, whatever, has to have a historian. And the main object is to keep public records public, because when you have a historical society, which is what we call a 501c3 nonprofit, they have a board of directors. And over the years, that board of directors change. And as the board of directors change, laws change. So what you can see 1 year, 5 years down the road, you might not be able to. So to keep public records public, to keep the history of the municipalities and to preserve that history, they came up with this series of historians.
And we're going to see that, I think, as we walk down the story here of Betsy Doyle, Betsy and Andrew Doyle. But just once again, by way of clarification, because it's also interesting, I think, for all of our viewers, both sides of the river here, you do have an interesting series of tasks or activities, right? Research and writing, teaching, courses. I think that's involved in what you do.
We're more a research archive center. We're not allowed to collect objects, although I must say we have one or two. But that's for the historical societies. We have photographs, diaries, newspapers, letters, all kinds of records in our office.
It's our heritage,
Yes,
no matter
it is.
what country you live in. Well, as we said, today we're here to talk about Betsy and Andrew Doyle, or is it Andrew and Betsy Doyle? Betsy, first of all, this is a bit of a journey for you, right? Because there is a plaque in Old Fort Niagara to Fannie Doyle. Tell us a little bit about those different names.
Well, in 1848, a fellow by the name of Jesse Walker wrote a little book called Tales of the Niagara Frontier in 2 volumes, but it's only 1 volume, and you can easily access it on the internet at this point. It's a lovely little piece, and he was telling stories about the War of 1812. Now, in the preface, and let's face it, nobody ever reads a preface, it says that the main characters are there, but in some cases minor characters. He's made some stuff up about them. And of course that's where Fannie Doyle comes in. Then in 1929, Sarah Sabrina Swain wanted to write a little booklet to help raise funds for the restoration of Old Fort Niagara. And that's when she wrote the book on Laura Secord and Fannie Doyle, borrowing the Fannie Doyle from Jesse Walker. And it just was a made-up name. Even Fannie's husband was Tom. He was the only son of a widowed mother. All the Victorian pathos you can imagine. Now, if they had read Lieutenant Colonel McFeely's journal, not just his state papers, he does say her name is Betsy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
later on, there's a return of women at Greenbush, and they list her as Mary, which is a little weird. And I
Yeah.
think her name was
Yeah.
Mary Elizabeth.
Right.
And when you look at the 148 names of women, half of them don't have a first name,
Hmm.
and something like 17% have the name of Elizabeth. Well, of course you're Betsy, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you have a nickname. So
Well, let's start out with some basic facts. We don't know much about her early years, but she was born in 1790, I
we
think,
think we were not
but
real
we're not really
sure.
sure. And her soon-to-be husband, Andrew Doyle, was born in 1788. But there's an interesting fact which gets him into trouble somewhere down the line. He was born on the Canadian side of the river
Yes.
in a place called St. David's, which is
Hmm.
near here. And his father, we find this out later as you start investigating the documentary record. His father was with a group called Butler's Rangers, and those were no friends of the Americans in the Revolutionary War. And his maternal grandfather was with the King's Regiment.
Yes.
So he's got a pretty British background, I
Oh,
suppose. Yeah.
yes. His maternal
Mm.
grandfather, Andrew Summers, was a settler in Schoharie, New York. He was German,
Mm.
and when the American Revolution started, joined the King's Royal Regiment of New York under Macdonnell.
Yeah. And somehow ended up
He was,
in Upper Canada.
yeah, he was
Yeah.
guarding Coteau de Lac, which is the
Mm.
rapids on the St. Lawrence there, and I think that's where his daughter Catharine married um, or met and married Benjamin Doyle, the father
Right.
of Andrew.
Okay.
And then
So
they came to Fort Niagara, where
yeah.
Butler's Rangers was headquartered.
And then somehow he ended up back in Fort Niagara, right? Because in 1810, sometime after that, he must have been around what, 22.
Yep.
He enlisted with one of the artillery regiment.
He was with the
Yeah.
1st U.S. Artillery under Fennick, he's interesting because
Mm.
he will be wounded at the Battle of Queenston. He's
Mm.
with the 1st U.S. Artillery, but two of his older brothers, he was like the John Fennick was like the youngest of 27,000 children or some wild family number like that. But his two older brothers were also loyalists.
Hmm. Well, we're going to find out that that will come to haunt him. In the meantime, the two of them meet somehow and get married, and she, as an army wife, was also stationed at Old Fort Niagara, and we know that they had to be married because the standing orders of the U.S. Army at the time said your wife can be there, but you can't have a mistress. You can't have a
Yeah.
mistress, right? Yeah,
Armies don't like just unattached women running around
yeah,
usually.
yeah. Um, and then she worked there, and the typical duties, I think, for an army wife were washerwoman or nurse or preparing meals. So that was 1810, right?
Yes, not
Yeah.
so much cooking. They are doing laundry, and at that point, she had to have rudimentary education because you have to know how to read and write. You
Hmm.
have to keep track on whose shirts you've laundered and how much they owe you.
Hmm.
You also get quarter rations from or half rations from the
From the
army.
army. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a nurse, you would be doing laundry and plus the scut work, the really nasty stuff. The problem
Yeah.
with being a nurse, though, is it's more sporadic than being a laundress.
Right. So, I guess 2 years go by. And then we get the Battle of Queenston Heights, which is well known to people in this area. And Andrew Doyle and his fellow artillery regiment members
Hmm.
head up there. But the bad news is he gets captured.
Correct.
Yeah.
Along with Winfield Scott.
Yes. And
And
that's because we know a little bit of the history after that because Winfield Scott was taken prisoner and they all went to Quebec.
yeah,
Yeah.
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 He one of the first things the British do after the battle is they send the wounded and the militia back to the American lines because they're a detriment. They keep the regulars, and they are going to parole them. And they are almost immediately put aboard a ship and sent down the St. Lawrence away from the Niagara area. And as they go down, they're in Quebec beginning of November.
Right. Takes a
When
while to get there. Yeah.
yeah, and I think
Yeah.
they changed it at one point. They have to row up part of the St. Lawrence because of the rapids. It takes a while, but they finally arrive in Montreal. And while they're there, Winfield Scott writes that he hears a commotion on the deck of the ship.
Right, and the British officers were interrogating some of these prisoners.
Yes, and they
Yeah,
had been
yeah,
trained to do this. I mean,
yeah,
they were
yeah.
a bit of jagoffs anyway. They're interrogating the prisoners. How long have you lived there? Are you an American citizen?
And they're listening for accents
And they're
too.
listening to accents. And
Yeah.
part of the problem is the
Yeah.
British Empire has gone through a series of revolts and revolutions, and not just the American Revolution, but you have the Irish Revolution of 1798. You have the Jacobite Revolution, problems in the 1740s, and you even have a wild rebellion in Australia in 1804.
Yeah.
And so they're very keen on keeping down these rebellions, and one way is to
Find out who potential
find
instigators might be.
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plus they needed sailors. Anyhow,
Yeah.
they have segregated about 25 of these men when Winfield Scott gets up there. Now, Winfield Scott was about 6'4", 6'5". He was not a little man. And I can imagine he used his height to as much advantage as he could over these
And
British.
he was the senior American Army officer.
Yes, he was.
Right. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
talks to these officers and says, these men are American
Yeah.
soldiers.
Yeah.
And he looks at the rest of the POWs that are there and says, don't say a word to these officers. You are all American citizens. Just shut up.
Yeah.
He then addresses the 24, 25 that have already been called out of the group and says, I can't do anything for you right now, but I will make sure that your story is told. And as they say in Galaxy Quest, if you've ever seen that movie, by Grapthor's hammer, you shall be avenged.
Right.
And so those 24 are put on a ship, again, almost immediately, and sent to England. Because the idea was, once you are a subject of the British king, you're always a subject of the British king.
They don't recognize naturalization.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
The funny thing, it doesn't work the other way.
Yes, that's right.
So they are almost immediately sent out. Winfield Scott and the rest of them follow behind, and they go through, I think, Halifax, and then eventually arrive through Boston.
Right.
And from there, Scott goes to reports to Washington and tells the tale.
And other greater glory, like the war in Mexico.
Yeah,
that's a whole other thing.
But he goes. He reports to Washington D.C. to the Secretary of War and to the President, and tells this story. And so immediately the American government says to the British government, "Well, you've taken 24 of our guys, and you want to try them, and they will." So probably hang them for treason.
And they threaten retribution.
And they said, well, we're going to take 24 of yours. Well, then the British government says, well, if you're taking 24 of ours, we're going to take 48 of your officers and non-commissioned officers. And if anything happens to the 24 that you have, we'll do in these 48. And then the Americans come back and say, well, then we'll take 96. And so we have a third grade playground battle.
But it's probably good in some way that all of this happened, because there were, let's say, other circumstances where people would be considered traitors and shot, and he survived.
Yes. It didn't do anything to help their condition. They're still on prison hulks for a long time, and then finally go to Dartmoor. But they are not tried for treason, and they are not then punished accordingly. Yeah. Because they were in the uniform of a combatant power.
Now, one of the things that I found interesting going, over the stuff I did in preparation, was you found a lot of documentary evidence to back up all of this. So if there's people out there that still think that this is, a silly story or not authentic, and in this case, you found a document, which was a letter from Secretary of War John Armstrong, right, to General Dearborn, saying, go and get 23 British hostages and keep them in close confinement.
Yes, and
Yeah.
there's also another letter that
Yeah.
these 24 wrote, and they're on
Yeah.
a prison ship. They're in outside of Chatham, England,
Yeah.
in the Thames estuary, and they write about how this horrible condition and how badly they've been treated, and they don't have enough food and clothes, and da 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 da. And they write it to the American government. It is in the state papers, and it lists all the names. And halfway down the list is the name Andrew Doyle.
Right. And then the trail goes, and you found, I believe, the author of a book on Dartmoor Prison, who
Yes.
also produced documents. So this is a real historian here, folks.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, Dr. Nicholas Guyat, who is a professor at Cambridge University in England, wrote a book on Dartmoor. And in doing so, he found the um, the War Office records where it lists all the American prisoners and what ship they were off of,
Yeah.
and when they were finally released. And it describes Andrew Doyle. He's there as a soldier that was taken on the 12th of October of 1812. We know he was released in October 31st of 1914. Well, no, that's when he arrived at
Right.
Dartmoor.
Yeah.
Was and then that he had been on a prison ship there at Chatham. He was born in Upper Canada, town of St. David's.
And the British wrote this down.
The British wrote this down. He
yeah.
was 25, 5'7", slight build with blue
Wow.
eyes. I always like it when they give us a description of what somebody looked like. And they also went to say that he had a hammock, a bed, and a blanket.
Wow. Wow. Now, fast forward to the Treaty of Ghent, and that was ratified in February of 1815. But he and his fellow prisoners in Dartmoor didn't get out right away, did they?
No, nor did their condition improve. It wasn't like they gave them better clothing and food. They were still being treated as POWs, when at this point they weren't technically or shouldn't have been prisoners. The problem was how to get them home.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the American government said, well, you guys are dumb enough to sail them off to England. You can bring them back. And the British government is like, no, 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 no. They're your soldiers. You have to pay to get them back.
Yeah.
And there's a big brouhaha over that. Well, in the meantime, the situation becomes extremely tense in the prison itself.
Indeed. And there's a riot and there's some gunfire. And
it seems that one of the American prisoners crawled under a wall into another walled part of the thing to retrieve a ball. There was a ball game going on.
Yeah.
And this spooked the guards, and they shot into the prisoners, and quite a few were killed and wounded.
Yeah.
And this was such an embarrassment that the British government said, okay, we'll just get you home. We'll just get you home.
Right.
And according to these papers, and also Andrew Doyle's obituary, he is put on a Spanish ship.
Oh, boy.
And shipped with a number of other prisoners, shipped to Castle Island, which is in Boston Harbor, and arrives in August of
1815.
Yes.
Now we're going to hit the pause button because we don't want people to feel we've forgotten about Betsy.
No.
So Betsy probably would have been aware that he was taken prisoner, right?
Yes.
But she wouldn't have known his whereabouts.
No, I think later on in May of 1813, Winfield Scott is back at Fort Niagara, and I think if she hadn't known before then, he would have told her.
But she's kept very busy.
Yes.
Now, after the Battle of 1812, the Battle of Queenston Heights, there was a truce.
Mm-hmm.
But the truce ended. And I guess the British decided it's time to start fighting again. And a huge cannonade began between Fort George and Old Fort Niagara, what we now call Old Fort Niagara. And Betsy was involved in that, wasn't she? Maybe we should just kind of, because there may be people from this area, set the stage a little bit, because uh, Old Fort Niagara is lower in altitude. I think not by much,
9 feet. And
9 feet.
so
But
what
our friend McFeely decided to correct that.
what they did is they took the top off what we now call the French castle. Native back then called it the old mess house or the old stone house. The French, of course, called it La Maison Machigally.
Uh-huh.
It's and the two redoubts. So you now have three gun platforms, and they put sod on top. It must have been a real mess. I mean, they took the roofs off, put sod all over the bottom and on the sides to protect um, the buildings from incoming fire. And so that became the platform.
But Betsy was not going to sit still during this cannonade, was she?
No, I think she probably felt, well, if she was going to get killed, you might as well be doing something. And so what she did was she took hot shot from probably the second floor. Um, from what I gathered, they had someone watching a fireplace there to observe the heating of these cannonballs, because if you get they're iron cannonballs. If they get too hot, they will warp. And then when you put them down the gun barrel, all kinds of nasty things happen. And you want them to be a burgundy cherry, not a bright red fire engine red cherry.
Just the right temperature. Huh?
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they are absolutely nasty. Fort Niagara does a hotshot demonstration with their 1812 reenactment over Labor Day, and it's amazing. And they're using a steel ball because it's safer than a iron ball, which would hold heat a lot more. And you can let it sit in water for 5 minutes, take it out, and gunpowder will go off.
Wow.
And
Wow.
this, of course, is the kind of things you want against wooden vessels,
Structures on the
wooden
other side.
structures,
Yeah.
equipment. And what is Fort George made out of?
Right.
Wood.
So Betsy was there, and she carried these cannonballs. Describe that a bit if you could, because you can't pick them up with your bare hands. You need tongs, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, from what I gather, it would have been a long pole with what would look like a two-tined fork, almost like a pitchfork, and the ball would sit in the tines of that fork. Now she is carrying them from the second floor to the third floor. They're wooden steps, they're narrow, they're winding. She's in petticoats, and there is no handrail. She must have had arms of steel if she's doing that all day, which apparently she was. And the other interesting thing about the bombardment is there's a letter from a man by the name of Robert Allison, who was originally from Huntington, Pennsylvania, and he is at Black Rock, which is 30 miles south of Fort Niagara. And he wrote a letter to his wife and said, yesterday there was a lot of loud noise. We hear it was a bombardment. It must have been in Lewiston. Well, Lewiston is 7 miles south of Fort
South of
Niagara,
the
which
fort.
tells you how loud this must have been and how continuous. McFeely, Colonel George McFeely, who was commanding it, says at the end he counted 51 holes through one of the barracks buildings alone
He
at Fort
also
Niagara.
described it as one of the worst cannonade battles that he'd seen. Betsy survived that, um, and she wasn't going to stop there because she did more, didn't she?
Well,
So that
she continued as a washerwoman. In May of 1815, um, they're getting ready to assault Fort George, and Winfield Scott has come and a bunch of other officers, and the whole story of her carrying these cannonballs has made the rounds. You know, they've gone from campfire to campfire about this wonderful woman and how she's a Joan of Arc, and everybody,
the Maid of Orleans.
yes, the Maid of Orleans,
Yes.
and they all see her as a, wearing a armor with a blue veil and a halo, I think, and they want her to come up to the top of
This is
the.
William Worth, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
And
So, famous American officer, we have an episode on him, and he comes, he'd read about it, and he summoned her.
yes, and
Right?
he's a young shaved-tail
Yeah.
lieutenant at this point. He and a couple other guys, and they go up to the top of the castle, and they summon her. And I can see she's probably been doing laundry. And I don't
Yeah.
know what most women look like when they do laundry, but I know what I look like
Mhm.
when I'm doing laundry. And she's probably sitting there going, "Oh, really now?" And they take one look at her and they say, "Oh, you look like Meg Morales."
Yeah,
Well,
you have to
Meg
explain that. Yeah.
Morales, and Keats and Walter Scott use her character in their writings,
Mm.
and she was this witchy, um, gypsy kind of character, not very nice, really. Um, but she was a character that throughout the 19th century, if you said Meg Morales, they all got a picture in their head. It's like if I said, "Oh, look there, Princess Leia," everybody sees a woman with cinnamon buns on her ear wearing a white robe. It's just you know who the character is. And so when they call her Meg Morales, they are not being kind at all. But then the problem is what happens to her after that.
Well, she's not done because the British are preparing to attack the fort, and she decides, I believe, that the militia is a little too timid. And what does she do to inspire them?
She
Yeah.
it says that on a cold night, she put on the arms and accoutrements of a guard, and you stood guard there on the walls, and she stayed in her place. I'm not sure whether it was the night before or
Two nights before?
2 nights or 1 night before the
Four.
British
Yeah.
actually did take at bayonet point the fort. It said she stayed at her place, her house, and we're not sure where her house was.
Yeah.
Um, but she grabbed 4 children when the attack came and ran with them. I don't think they were all hers. I think she just was grabbing kids because one was described as being 14,
Yeah.
probably watching her children, and they just ran.
And she undertook a remarkable journey, right?
Oh, yes.
First to Batavia,
Hmm.
which is what,
That's
60
60,
miles?
and
Yeah.
this is by Google. So,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
if you're trying to evade enemy soldiers and native allies,
Mhm.
you're not going to go in a straight line. She basically went from Batavia then across New York State. Uh, I don't like driving across New York State on the thruway in summer in an air conditioned vehicle without children. I can't imagine doing it on foot, or even maybe she got a wagon ride on occasion with children
Well,
in
you
the
you
winter.
guys are in the snow zone there.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's gone through some pretty nasty areas, and she arrives at the Greenbush Cantonment
Which is a
in
huge base. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Near Albany. Yeah.
south and east of Albany, so
Albany.
it's
Okay.
really out there. Um, and that's when we get a letter from the man commanding the cantonment by the name of Simon Larned or Learned, depending on whose
And
spelling
he
of his name you
documents
see.
a lot of the things that we now know
Yes, he
about her. Yeah.
does.
Yeah.
He says that, Mrs. Doyle is here. She manned a cannon. She stood guard. She ran. Her husband was taken from Fort Niagara to England. She's on his list of women there at the cantonment. He also goes on to say, and I think this is highly interesting, he thinks that she is a worthy woman and that she is sick from this ordeal and that he has her in his kitchen.
Yes. But there was a reason she probably convalesced in the kitchen.
Well, it would have been a safe place. Now, this cantonment had lots of places they could have put her in, but he thought she was had enough merit, if you will, to stay in his kitchen. And the kitchen would have been the warmest room of
Warmest
the
place.
house.
Yes.
It's where people could take care of her. Um, it was a good place to be, and the fact that it was the commandant's house really says how much he admired her.
Unfortunately, though, sometime afterwards, she caught a fever again. We're now, what, a couple of years after the end of the War of
Hmm.
1812. and she didn't survive that.
No, this is in 1819.
Gene.
There is a letter that says that she has died after being ill for a month, and
Not by this fellow, but
by another, yeah,
by
no, no, yeah,
whoever took over.
I can't
And
remember his name right now, but yes.
yeah, yeah,
And he says that she hadn't been paid in over a year, and that her illness would have been more comfortable, if you will, if she could have had funds,
yeah.
to secure stuff. And he was requesting that this back pay be given to her daughter,
Daughter,
and that's the
right.
only child that is mentioned. What happens to the daughter, I don't know,
Yeah,
but it does say on the official letters that they have given her the money.
right. So that's good. Now, back to Andrew. So Andrew, I guess, was looking for Betsy, but
How do you look for
yeah,
somebody?
it's not the age of the internet, right? And
Right.
he's in Boston.
And she's not
Yeah,
she's not at Fort Niagara anymore. He knows it was taken by the British,
right.
and a lot
Yeah,
of the Americans were taken into Canada. A number of them died. Who knows where she is? And who knows what condition Andrew was when he first came over. He was almost 3 years in a British prison, which is not a good place to be at that point.
true, but he survives
He
and
survives.
he remarries.
He remarries a Nancy Sherman, or Shearman, again, depending on whose spelling you look at. They live in Plainfield, Connecticut. They're actually married in February of 1819. So Andrew is a bigamist for 2 months
Yeah,
and doesn't even know it. He eventually goes and becomes a farmer in Swansea, Massachusetts. Nancy dies in 1860, and he dies in July of 1875 at 88.
and a couple of years before that, and it's in his obituary, and before that, he applies for a pension, and we find out all of this other information that we didn't know before, which we now know, right?
Right,
Yeah,
about who his parents were. It's interesting when you look at the census from the 1850s, 60s, whatever. He says he was born in St. David's. He says he was born in Canada, but that he came over as a 4-year-old to the US.
yeah,
And even in the letters from Simon Larned, when they're talking about Betsy,
yeah,
he mentions that her husband had come over as a young child
yeah,
with his parents, which is not the case at all, because Benjamin and Catharine Doyle are living in Beaufort,
yeah.
Princeton area.
Well, you know what? I'm I'm counting on you to come back sometime, and because you will have dug up all the facts, and then we'll get the true story. But um, it it it's a tremendous story. It has all kinds of aspects. Husband and wife lose one another. A young woman dies probably because of exposure and lack of reimbursement for the job she's undertaking. Um, Tell us a little bit about how we remember Betsy now, because it started with a plaque. I think we alluded to that, but there's some other things that have been done in her remembrance.
There, in the early 30s, when they were restoring
Yeah,
the castle there at Fort Niagara, the Daughters of 1812 put together a plaque on the third floor. There on the riverside where the piece would have been that Betsy manned. And on it is a quote from Lieutenant Colonel George McFeely
McFeely. Yeah,
about
yeah,
Betsy Doyle, but they
mhm,
call her Fannie,
yeah,
what have you. And it's a funny little plaque. And as a reenactor, I used to sit and think, it's too high it's so high you trip over it, and because of its shape you can't sit on it or lean against it. It's just kind of there. And back in 2010, I kept hearing people say, well, she's a made-up story. There was never a Fannie Doyle. This is just something that they made up to counteract Laura Secord. And I heard this from people on
yeah,
both sides of the river,
yeah.
and I'm sitting there going, no,
And so,
Absolutely not,
you,
because McFeely came from Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And for
yeah,
most people, this would mean nothing except that the one of the famous women of Carlisle, Pennsylvania was a woman by the name of Mary Ludwig Hayes Macaulay, better known as Molly Pitcher,
picture. Okay.
who in the American Revolution took over her husband's position on a gun at the Battle of Monmouth when he was injured. And she got a pension from the state of Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and as well as the U.S. government for it. And she lived to 1823. Now, McFeely may not have known her personally, but he would have certainly known of her. One, because of her reputation. She also was cleaning the courthouse steps there in Carlisle and nursing people and what have you. And I speculate that one of the reasons McFeely mentions uh, Betsy in his official report is because of Mary Macaulay.
Right. And because he's from that area,
He's
and
from that
you
area.
always know local stories and you retain them,
And
you know?
this is a
Yeah.
way of ensuring that maybe later on she can get a pension, just like Mary Macaulay.
Yeah. Now, that's not the only thing that's been done. I think now if you go, I certainly in my trip, over to the fort, there are more plaques.
Yes,
Uh,
they updated it.
and there is now a resolution which was passed by the Senate of New York
Yes, she's on the
recognizing her. Yeah.
and the Niagara Falls Heritage Center actually has a T-shirt
Ah,
with Betsy on it. I almost wore it today. That was last year's Christmas present.
okay. Um, when is your book coming out? I tried to find your book.
I haven't written it yet.
Oh, but you know everything inside out and upside down.
I know.
Yeah,
And I keep
it would be a wonderful update, So maybe we can ask our fans here, send Catherine, send Kate a little note and tell her to write all of this down because it's such a wonderful story, and that's what we do in this series. We look at, people and what they did and personal stories. It doesn't really matter, we have black folks, indigenous folks, women, men, and we really like her story being in our
yeah.
series. So thanks for coming and doing that. We
You're
really,
welcome. I'm glad to be here.
yeah. Okay. Well, that is it for this episode of the Stories of 1812. You can find out more information. We're going to leave some show notes about Kate and, her marvelous detective work in finding all of this documentary evidence so nobody calls her a shadowy figure anymore. Our website is www.storiesof1812.com. And we'd like to thank Jim Valen for doing the technical work of Valen Entertainment. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.